Hi, my name is Brian Main, and I grew up in Frederick County. And yes, all right, thank you. It might drop down again. Anyway, I grew up in Frederick County, and my father's roots go back to the 1700s. Unfortunately, though, I guess I am not, according to Chris, a Frederictonian because I only have 4 generations in Mount Olivet Cemetery. So, and I have spent the last 10 years searching for, locating, and documenting cemeteries in and around the Frederick County area. Frederick County was originally created in 1748 from parts of Prince George's and Baltimore counties. In 1776, the county was divided to form Washington and Montgomery counties. And in 1837, the county was further divided to form Carroll County out of parts of Frederick and Baltimore counties. It is the largest county in Maryland. So during this presentation, I will talk about the how and why I began this project, how I did my research, how I went about finding all these cemeteries, documenting them, and my final publications. I first learned that there's a Main family cemetery, which is pictured here, in 2008. It is there, trust me. I learned about it at a family reunion, and somebody said to me, "Did you know there's a Main family cemetery?" I said, "No, of course not." And he described that it is near the Dandy Restaurant, which for those who are not from Frederick County is a restaurant that used to be on top of Braddock Mountain. And he said, go to the Dandy, walk across the road, go in 100 yards, and it's right there. Well, apparently not. And so my brother and I decided, hey, let's go find this cemetery. It took us 2 days of actually looking for this cemetery because it looked like this. And on the second day, we actually said, we're out of here. We have no idea where this is at. And we just happened to be walking down a stone wall because it was the easiest way to walk. And lo and behold, I think that's it. So we documented a little bit of it, took some pictures of it. I came back a little bit later with a GPS unit and got the coordinates of it so I'd actually know where it would be and not spend 2 days searching for this thing. So it was about that time I also started doing my family genealogy when my children were born and my mother had died. So I started doing genealogy just to kind of learn about my family. And I learned that I had other family cemeteries in the area, and none of which I'd ever heard about. Most of these cemeteries had already been previously documented in Jacob Holcraft's Names in Stone, but the actual locations for them were not exactly known anymore because they were always said, it's on John Smith's farm, and John Smith is no longer around, and his farm most likely is not either. I started volunteering at the Historical Society of Frederick, which is now Heritage Frederick. And we would occasionally get questions about, do you happen to know where this cemetery is? And with the exception of the Names in Stone book, nobody knew anything about where they might even be. It was about this time, too, that I met late friend Bob Fout, who he happened to have known a couple of these cemeteries. And one day he was kind of bored, I think, and he said, hey, I'm going to go show you where the cemetery is. And so out and about we went, took a couple of pictures, and that's about how it really snowballed for me, was because of him. Down the middle is Jacob Holcraft, who was the author of Names in Stone. His book, Names in Stone, is on the left there. And as you can see, if you can see, it says he documented 75,000 names, inscriptions from Frederick County, Maryland. My book is on the right, which is aptly named Finding Names in Stone. And he documented somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 cemeteries in the area. Mine only documents 113 of them because it is full of pictures and not just names and dates. His book was published in 1966, and I believe he spent 10 or 12 years going around the county looking for all these cemeteries. When I first decided I wanted to do all these cemeteries, what I did was make a spreadsheet of all the known cemeteries. I originally used the Names in Stone list because that was the most readily available. And I used his names, as you can see, the name field. He numbered all of his cemeteries, and so I used, that's what the numbers mean. The address are things that either he had put in there or I had later found out. The latitude and longitudes are ones that I entered myself because he wouldn't have known them, obviously. And then there are other fields that are mostly for me to kind of reference things. One of them is a notes thing that says, hey, I'm missing stones, or a stone was missing from when I originally found it. And then what I would do is I would, as I would find the cemeteries, I would go from being red so you can easily see them and make them black. So I knew which cemeteries I would need later on. I used Google Sheets simply because it was something I could go on any computer and find if I needed to. Instead of just being at home, I could do it at work. I could do it at home. I could do it in a library, anything like that. So my next source of information was Find a Grave, which I'm sure everyone here is knowledgeable about. What I did is you can actually go in and just say, I want a list of cemeteries for a certain county, and it will give it to you. And so I cross-referenced those cemeteries with the ones that I'd already had. Any of those that had actual locations, I updated them in my spreadsheet. And any of them that were new, I would add, even though sometimes some of that information can be questionable. I still added it and would make notes on it later. As you can see with this Link Krieger Cemetery here, not all the longitudes and latitudes were correct. In this case, they have it listed right about here, but it is actually well over here. I don't know if somebody just made a typo or they were just guessing. And I would go through and correct those when I got the chance as well on Find a Grave so that they were more accurate. Also making a big list of the Frederick County cemeteries. You can sometimes find out that people mistakenly added a cemetery to Frederick County, Maryland instead of Frederick County, Virginia, or it was close to the border or something like that, and you could go through and have them correct that. So that was another good reason to go through the Find a Grave. Another source of information are the old maps. The one on the left over there is the 1873 Titus Atlas, Woodsboro. And in this case, it happens to be the Stahl Family Cemetery. That road no longer exists, and that is an old ford going across the river. And that cemetery now sits in the middle of a field. But it was definitely very helpful to know that that cemetery was in that generalized area. And because they actually did map it, you can overlay it to modern maps and get a much closer idea of where it's at. The other side here is USGS quadrangles, and this one happens to be Plymouth Rocks, and the little cemetery is right here, which happens to be the Hoffman Family Cemetery. These were actually quite useful because in 1953, or in the 1950s and 60s, these would have been the same types of maps that Holdcraft would have used. And the roadways that you kind of see on there, they're mostly dirt roads, and they are now a lot of those happen to be gone. So it was useful for when he would say it's along this road, and you go looking for that road doesn't exist anymore, but you can go backwards and say, hey, there's a road that's right there. So you get a better idea. And these maps here, the quadrangles, are all free online through USGS. So you can go look for them. They don't actually have all of them on there. So they don't list all the cemeteries on there. And you actually have to scroll through each one and look for all of them, but you can actually do it. My next step was to create a digital map. The one on the left is a map panel from Names in Stone. And then the one on the right is Google Earth. I imported into a geographical information system, which is what I do for work, and imported the information and then laid down plans for each one of the cemeteries. I then imported that in Google Earth. When I was doing Google Earth, it makes it much easier to see where locations are in the more modern aspects of things. And this here, sometimes you can zoom in very closely and actually see where a cemetery is. This happens to be the Wingfelds Family Cemetery, and it's in the middle of a field. And there's only 2 tombstones and a couple of field stones there. So it's not very big, but sometimes you can actually spot them when you start to know what to look for. This is ArcMap, which is a GIS system. I took all the base layers from the Frederick County website, which you can download for free. Base layers are things like roadways, which are the red lines here, county outlines, you can get city outlines, you can get river outlines, that type of thing. What I did was then also overlay that first map from Names in Stone, and you basically overlay it and you stretch it out a little bit, and then hopefully they overlap well enough. It takes a little bit of playing around with, but you can actually get it in there. That was when I went through and changed and laid down all my little spots for everything. And you don't see it here. You can make these color coded as well. So you can see, I have not been here, I've been here. I actually color code mine for a lot of different things. Ones that no longer exist, that I know don't exist. Ones I've heard exist, but I have no real proof of it. So you can color code things. I made it easier here. When I go and find an exact location, you go back into this program and you tell it to go to the exact location. So this way, that's why you might see a couple of points that are off of the other black dots, because they've been slightly moved and that type of thing. The next part is the most time-consuming part, at least for me, was the legwork of finding and documenting these cemeteries. And as you can see from this one, this is why it was very difficult, because you could not see this one from any road or anything like that. It was actually up over a hill. I believe that the house is back in that corner, and the river, the Monocacy River, runs back this way. And this one is actually the Hoffman Family Cemetery, the one that was on the USGS quad. And again, you can see how difficult that would be, because there's nothing around. That was actually a horse field, so I'm surprised that the tombstones are still around. Because so many of these smaller family cemeteries like this one are located on farms or in the woods, I do most of my searching in the early spring, late February till early April, or late fall, October through December. I'm usually only able to go looking every other weekend, and I have found that Saturdays are the time to go when most people tend to be home, and you knock on their door and you say, I'm doing this. So what I would do is, when I was getting ready for the weekend, I would go back to my map and go, there's an area I haven't been to in a while. There's 5 or 6 cemeteries that I think I can go find. And then I would write them down. What I would do is I would put a list of the cemetery on the index card, the number, which happens to be the Holdcraft number. That is how I tend to do things. Road names, or if I had an address, sometimes I would do that. The approximate coordinates, and the number of stones that was recorded previously, because sometimes you can stumble across places that are, if you look and you go, oh, there's only 2 stones here. What's wrong? What's going on? Is there more here? Did somebody steal stones, which I've never seen? So yes, I would do that, and I would have a couple of those, and then this way, when I finished everything, I just cross it off and go on to my next card. After I would pick up anyone that was going with me that day, Bob Fowler used to go with me quite a bit. Henry Quigley liked to go with me a few times. That's when the fun starts. Knocking on strangers' doors and saying who I am and why I'm there. You get used to it after a while, because people look at you very funny. I'm looking for a cemetery. Most people actually were quite friendly, and they would go, oh yeah, hey, it's back that way. Yeah, go ahead, take pictures. And in this case, you actually get nice pictures of the old houses too, next to the cemeteries. And this happens to be the Devilbus house from 2014. So after that is when I would take an inventory of the stones, get out my little black notebook and write down the coordinates, write down the date, write down the cemetery name. And another reason that I would write down the number of stones is because one time I actually did stumble across a cemetery that I was not looking for, had no knowledge of whatsoever, and was completely different. And both Bob and I were like, this isn't right. What's going on here? So it does help to have more than just the name of a cemetery and an approximate location. Later, when I get home, I will go back on the Google Earth. I will type in the coordinates and have it zoom in for me. And then I will look to make sure that I have done the proper coordinates, because I was just there that day. So I have an idea of where I was at, and to make sure that everything looks good, in which case then I go back and transcribe those coordinates into my Google Sheets, And then that never gets touched again unless I really need to. So that is actually my official, what I count as my official information. All right, so for each cemetery that I document, I take multiple figures of each stone. And I currently use a very old DSLR D40X Nikon. And I also use a remote flash. The remote flash, as you can see here on the right-hand side, actually I did use a flash, but the flash missed the stone and you really can't read it. That's what it would normally look like at normal sunlight. And the one with the flash, if hit properly, it will fill in and make shadows within the carvings of it. There are times that you can actually see things when you look at a stone and it's completely, what looks completely blank, you can take a picture of it like that and everything comes out and it's extremely readable. It doesn't always work because sometimes it's just too badly eroded, but it does help quite a bit. And it's extremely rare that using the flash doesn't work properly if there's actually something readable on there. Sometimes the sun makes it a little bit nicer, so I don't go with it, but 95% of the time I use a flash to get the to get what's on the stone, and it also makes the picture a little bit nicer too. It gets set up on a tripod, you put it about 3 feet away from it and just kind of aim at it. It takes some playing around with, but it's not, after a while you can get away with it. All right, so I have about 17,000 photographs over the last 10 plus years. So what I do is I set up a folder on my computer and I name it the name of the cemetery and the number that I've associated with it. And then I go through and rename each one of the pictures. In this case, this was a Jones family cemetery. And if there happens to be, you can see, I don't know if you can see, there's 2 Moseses. And if there happens to be 2 or 3 of the same name, if there's no middle name or anything like that, I will add either a birth date or a death date, whichever one happens to be on the stone, to differentiate the 2. This makes it a lot easier to find, because then if I want to look for somebody, I can just search my whole computer and up it comes if I happen to have it. I don't always label every last stone. If I take 5 or 6 pictures, I usually just label 1 or 2. The rest of them I can delete. And if I do happen to straighten them or take in a light, change the lighting on a little bit or do some editing, I will actually save that as a separate one. I won't delete my original one. So I always keep my original one. Then within a couple of days, I usually go and add them to Find a Grave. This is the main family cemetery. And that actually was taken in the 70s. I know that photo because it's in the Historical Society. And that's the more modern one down the bottom is mine. I tend not to add 2 of them if they are readable like that, but if there are noticeable changes, then I will add them. And when I find whole new cemeteries, I will also add those because I have found new cemeteries. Only once or twice have I been asked, please do not add this to the internet, in which case I have not. This here is my publication, and I tried to semi-mimic the original Names in Stone to make researching easier between the 2 books. The original Names in Stone had 6 map panels, and I copied them. The only ones that were in, you'll see the numbers difference. The only ones that are different between mine and the original are because those are included in my book. There was no reason to include the larger church cemeteries and things like that, because otherwise people might think that I actually took pictures of all those. Then what I would do is I would have each cemetery has its own chapter, basically. And I start out by a picture of the whole cemetery, if I can, the best picture I can. And then underneath of that, and then I also put a short little note about what it looks like, where it might be located, the date, the coordinates, and if I was with somebody that day. But for that, any new missing stones that have either been buried or not moved or totally destroyed or just not readable or listed, so somebody knows that what was there. And then each individual stone has its own picture, and underneath of it, the name, ages, birth date, death date, husband, wife, child of, that type of thing. If I found differences, I would bold them to make it stand out so that I could, because, reading these old stones, sometimes you make mistakes when you're writing things down. People transcribe things. So it was just an easy way to people know, hey, this is different from what was originally published. This is when I was telling you that you can sometimes stumble across cemeteries. The one on the left is the Garrett family cemetery. And as you can see, it's surrounded by wall. And that's how it was described in Names in Stone. And the other one is the Knoxville Mountain Cemetery. It was an old black cemetery for a church in Knoxville, which is not far away. And Bob and I actually were going down the road going, I wonder where this cemetery is. We'd already knocked on somebody's door and they used the ring and said, don't know what you're talking about, get out of here. And so we saw this guy walking down the road carrying his groceries. And we're like, if anybody knows, that guy. So we stopped, rolled down the window. Hey, we're looking for a cemetery. He's like, yeah, you go down the road, make the left, and then it's right by this address. So, oh, that's great. Thanks. We pull in, we get the Knoxville Mountain Cemetery. I'm like, this doesn't look right, Bob. There's something wrong because there's no stone wall. There's way too many cemetery stones. And we happened to open it up and none of those names were in Names in Stone. And it's like, this is wrong. And that's how you can occasionally stumble across new cemeteries. This one is actually one of my personal favorite stories. This is the Lincoln Family Cemetery. And this is how I actually kind of got started doing this, because when I was volunteering at the Historical Society, a couple of women came in and said, we're looking for this cemetery. And I said, I don't know where it's at, but I can try and help you. I found somebody that said, hey, there's coordinates here. I gave them the coordinates. We looked them up online and it was kind of where it was supposed to be. I said, that's where it's supposed to be. They went to look for it apparently. The next day I said, you know what? I'm going to take my motorcycle for a nice ride. I rode down there and the place that they said it was at was somebody's driveway and a little culvert. And I went, that can't be right. And so I drove up this driveway and they were having a party. And I said, I'm looking for this cemetery. And the guy goes, yeah, there were a couple women here yesterday looking for that place. It's not here. And I'm like, yeah, I can see that. And he's like, it is up the road about a mile. And before you get to the new section, the new housing development, go knock on, I don't remember what his name was because it's been too long. Knock on his door because he's farming the place now. He'll tell you where it's at and you can just go there. So I get in and I knock on his door and this guy comes out and I'm in riding suit. And this guy comes out and he's got this nice Harley Davidson tattoo down his thing. And I went, well, at least he'll understand why I'm writing. I'm not, and I said, I'm going to go look for the cemetery. And he's like, yeah, it's behind that barn over there. You got to go down and round and go up and right behind that barn. And I said, oh, okay. So I went back down the driveway, up the driveway that was only a couple of feet away from it, and started looking behind it. And he goes, you afraid to go out there? And I was like, oh. He's like, it's not there, it's up on the field. Just take a motorcycle and walk on the field. So I took him up on his offer and rode through the field. And as you can see, that's where I parked and took my pictures. So special thanks to, can you hit the thing, Glenn? There it goes. Okay, so a special thanks to Bob Fout. Unfortunately, he died in 2018. Hannah Quigley, who likes to show up in my photos, usually as a leg, but in this case, most of her body. And Mimi Ashcraft, who helped with some of the cemeteries out in Carroll and Frederick County. Glenn Wallace, who helped out, and he was the one that did my book cover, so thank you. And then Mary Mannix and Caroline from the Frederick, Maryland room, Ron from Mount Olivet, Jeff Duval and Peter Perret, and the staff at Heritage Frederick. So